I would like to welcome Andreј Kurkov, the author of the novel Grey Bees, which was recently published by publishing house Artkonekt. Milena Nikolowska made the translation, and the publication of the book is supported by the European Union. Hello, Mr. Kurkov. Thank you for accepting the invitation to talk with me.
Hello, Vladimir.
Grey Bees is a novel that, with seemingly simple literary technique, through the story of an ordinary man, a beekeeper, delves into the complex Russian-Ukrainian conflict, full of misunderstandings and brutality. One of the aspects of the novel is that it can be read as an exploration of how a person can remain human in the midst of a brutal environment where the horrors of war are an everyday reality. Is that even possible, and in what way?
This is a question.
Yes.
Yes. Well, it's becoming more and more difficult to remain human if you think about the enemy, about people who are actually killing your neighbors, your family, your loved ones. But actually, Ukrainians became much more human to each other because of this war. And from the very beginning of the full-scale invasion in February 2024, suddenly the nation became very collective and very consolidated. And I felt it on myself because we were with my wife in Kyiv on that morning when the explosions were heard. Our children and their friends were in Western Ukraine, in Lviv. And one day later, we decided to go by car to Lviv to pick up our children and to take them to even more western part in Ukraine, to Transcarpathian region. And we were helped on the way by many people because there were problems with petrol, there were traffic jams. And actually, when we ended up in Uzhgorod, a town on the border with Slovakia, unknown retired lady gave us key from her apartment. So me, my wife, and my older son, we stayed there 4 months in Uzhgorod. Yes, in the zone of the war, it's impossible to remain human. But if you are away from the war, even if you hear the explosions of the missiles and drones, you are becoming more human, and you are thinking more about other people than about yourself.
The novel is written with cinematic dynamism, lively dialogues, and filled with unusual characters. It simultaneously offers a deep insight into the nature of a land shaken by conflict and war. The novel addresses the beginning of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which started in 2014. The novel was published in 2018, and the war between Russia and Ukraine began in 2022. If you were to write the same novel today, would you have a harsher perspective regarding the approach to the characters, the warring sides, and the portrayal of Russians?
I would not be able to write this book today. I mean, this book was written only in 2017 after I went 3 times to the war zone in Donbass. Actually, first time I went with my colleagues, Sergei Zhadan and Maria Sadovskaya, practically along all the front line to the Russian border near Severodonetsk in Lugansk region. And I met lots of people, local people and soldiers. And this was the result of these 3 trips, the book. In fact, actually, I was surprised in 2017 that by that time there were about 200 books written by the war in Donbass, by ex-soldiers, by volunteers, by journalists, but there was not a single book about civil population which remained in Donbass, in the area of the fighting. And that was my first motivation, to give voice to people actually who were too afraid to go away from their houses, even when the war approached them and destroyed their life.
Yes, I understand. As an author, you do not directly judge, comment, or impose opinions and viewpoints on the reader. Is this a better way to write about war than more explicit condemnation?
Well, I mean, this is a human story. It's not a story of the heroes and traitors. It's about actually how people lived, how people understood life. It's also, I mean, this is also fault of Ukrainian politicians for last 30 years, that they didn't manage to integrate different regions in one national territory. So, I mean, it's very easy to write propagandist prose or to express political views and say that this is a bad guy, this is a good guy. But life is always much more complicated. And if you see in the history of the wars and conflicts, then you can actually find why this happened. And you understand that everything was avoidable. But unfortunately, this war shows that we will always have wars in this or that country. And there is even a danger of European war, more close to Brussels than Ukrainian. So you shall just have respect for ordinary people, and you should talk to them, and you should see how they understand the world around them, and if they understand it correctly.
Your works are said to combine dark humor, depictions of post-Soviet reality, and elements of surrealism. Has our reality today become just that, a strange mixture of dark humor, dystopia, and surreal sense of existence?
Well, I mean, dark humor in this combination is the remedy. It's a medicine. Because, I mean, if you don't have sense of humor, you have less chances to survive. Your psyche will be affected by the surreal events around you. And if you give up, if you give in, if you just decide to survive and not to think about anything, then you don't exist in this society. So, I mean, I was following surreal developments in 1970s and 80s in the Soviet Union. And in 1991, I thought that actually now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, life will become less surreal, more civilized, more stable, etc. But I was wrong. And actually, I can see that not only post-Soviet countries, but some European countries also create surreal situations, either by political means or by other means. So yes, dystopia is a permanent ingredient of this dish, and surrealism is like salt and pepper. So, I mean, you cannot avoid them. And probably you can find these kind of ingredients in every country. It's just there are countries like Germany where the government gives exact amount of salt and pepper, so you don't need to mix anything up. Everything is already pre-cooked for you.
While reading the novel, I got the sense that you have an exceptional understanding and empathy for people, for the diverse individuals coming from different backgrounds. What is the relationship today between writing and humanism?
Well, I mean, there is not much humanism in Ukrainian literature today because of the obvious reasons. And of course, I mean, the situation is very dramatic in Ukraine. We have more than 50 writers and poets killed in the war, some killed by Russian bombs and missiles, some killed as soldiers. They were mobilized or volunteered to go. And one author, Vladimir Vakulenko, he was executed by Russians. He was killed from the pistol in Kharkiv region. So also from the beginning of the war, writers almost stopped writing novels. So everybody writes nonfiction, and of course nonfiction either about the war or about Ukrainian history, because Ukrainian history has a lot to do with this war. And in this sense, of course, I mean, you can write probably nonfiction with a humanism. The best example is Philip Sands and Martin Pollack, who write wonderful nonfiction books filled with human stories and actually human characters. But otherwise, it's not much space for humanism here. Although, I mean, if we take humanism in a more general way, I mean, the Ukrainians are treating Russian prisoners of war with too much of respect at the time when Russians are killing Ukrainian prisoners of war, and they killed more than 200 of them now.
Yes, I understand. You are a bilingual author, a native Russian speaker who has written in both Russian and Ukrainian. Has the war in Ukraine changed your attitude towards which language you will primarily write in? And how will it affect your future writing regarding the language in which you are writing?
Well, I mean, we still have writers and poets who write in Russian. They are marginalized, of course. I mean, and they were marginalized before also, because I mean, the Ukrainian intellectuals consider proper Ukrainian literature only the one which is written in Ukrainian. I write and I will write fiction in Russian. It is my mother tongue. The bookshops now in Ukraine don't want to sell books in Russian, so they sell my books in Ukrainian translation. And I accept it. I mean, I understand that Russian language was always actually an instrument of suppression for Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture. And Russian speakers in Ukraine, not speakers, but writers, actually, Russian language writers will pay for this, because, I mean, Russian language speakers, it's a large community who are not really cultured, who do not necessarily read books. They just live in the areas where Russian is spoken, like Odessa or Kharkiv or Zaporizhia. I mean, I understand my situation. I don't complain. I accept it. And I continue to write about Ukraine because, I mean, Ukraine is a multicultural state. We have writers who write in Gagauz language, which is a Turkic language in Bessarabia in Moldova. We have many writers who write in Hungarian. We have writers who write in Surjik, a mixture of Russian and Ukrainian, which is spoken in the countryside. So I hope that Ukraine will remain multicultural and multilinguistic society, and that tolerance will come back after the war.
Speaking about your book, Our Daily War, Giles Harvey from the New York Times says, Ukraine's greatest novelist is fighting for his country. Thinking of you. Do you believe that through your books you are fighting for your own country?
Well, from the very beginning of the war, I was given talks, lectures, and took part in discussions in many, many countries, actually. I went many times to the US, to Canada, dozens of times to Italy, France, Belgium, Holland, etc., Norway. So, I mean, this is my mission. This is the only thing I can do well. Because from 1999, I was explaining Ukraine to the world through my books, but also through my lectures and talks. And yes, I mean, I wouldn't say it is a fighting, because fighting is something which is much more dangerous than this. But I received threats also. I received threats before, and I received threats recently, and obviously they were coming from Russia. So I assume that I'm doing everything right.
When speaking with you, at the time when the war between Russia and Ukraine is ongoing, it is expected to ask, how do you assess the current situation with the war? Can peace be expected in the near future?
Well, I don't believe there might be peace with Russia in the next 10, 20 years, or at least until the death of Putin. The situation is not very good because we don't have enough ammunition, and the Western partners are sending their help with long delays. So now actually Ukrainian army is retreating in Donbass, and Russian army is advancing because Russia receives millions of artillery shells from North Korea, drones and other equipment from Iran. And of course, Russian economy is working 24 hours a day for the war. I believe the war can be stopped and some kind of negotiation can start, but it is not something that will immediately solve the problem. So, I mean, the problem will be solved only when there is another government, another regime in Russia, and Russia will announce that Russia will not attack in the future neighboring countries, and they don't want to grab territory of another country.
And final questions. On which fiction books do you work now? Can you write on some other issues, some other topics than this topic that we were speaking about in last 15 minutes?
I couldn't write fiction for 2.5 years after February 24, but this summer I restarted writing fiction. Actually, I'm about to finish the novel which I started before full-scale invasion. And this is a novel, it's a historical crime novel set in Kiev in 1919 during the so-called Civil War after collapse of Russian Empire. And if I don't lose my energy and my head, I will start to write next book about the same period, maybe in December.
Mr. Andreј Kурков, thank you very much for this interview and for this opportunity to speak for the Macedonian audience in context of the translation of your book, Grey Bees.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.